We are back. I am Andrew Langer. This is WBAL News Radio 1090 and FM 101.5. I have been eager to do this interview ever since the opportunity came up. My guest is Chris Hillman, one of the founding members of the Byrds. He's got a book out. It is a great book. I have read it. I'm going to tell Chris how much I enjoyed it in just a second. The book is called Time Between: My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. You can get signed hardcover copies of it at chrishillman.com. And I got to tell you, Chris, your publicist sent me a copy of the book. I turned around and actually went ahead and ordered it on Amazon Kindle. Had it with me everywhere. It is fantastic. It gives a tremendous insight into your work. Let me ask you this, because I know you're going to quiz me on it, but I want to start here. Your love of bluegrass. I was a bluegrass fan when I was a kid. I know you've done some work with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Will the Circle Be Unbroken is an album that is a cherished part of my collection, actually in multiple formats. Talk about how your love of bluegrass began. How did that happen? Where did it go? Tell us all about that.
Well, Andrew, I really stumbled into it. I always think that I think rock and roll. Here I was at my age, my group, my peer group. We were all about 10, 11, 12 years old when Elvis came out, and then for the next few years, 56, 7, 8, right? The most incredible music is on the radio. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, influenced the Beatles, and all of us. About 1959, it went to sleep, I thought. This is just me talking. And all of a sudden, Pat Boone was singing Tutti Frutti. Well, that's okay. With all due respect, I have great respect for Pat Boone. But all of a sudden, there was Fabian, Frankie Avalon, all that stuff, and that was fine. But what came along, that door opens when those guys are getting on the radio, AM radio, and then what came along was folk music from the college campuses and jazz, late 50s, early 60s. So I really discovered bluegrass through first listening to folk music. So I'll tell you who I listened to.
Okay.
Woody Guthrie, Cisco Houston, Leadbelly, loved him. Weavers and Pete Seeger. And my older sister, who was a wonderful, wonderful person, who's not with us anymore, but really got me into that kind of music, because I had heard the Kingston Trio. They had a big hit, but I liked it sort of, but I really liked the more traditional stuff.
Sure.
But in the interim, as I go through that, I hear the New Lost City Ramblers first, which is an old-time string band group with Pete's brother Mike Seeger was playing mandolin. So that was another thing. I went, what's he doing? What's that instrument? So then I hear bluegrass. What's that instrument? So then I hear bluegrass. I went, oh, my God. Okay, what got me, Andrew? It was exciting. It was positive, up-tempo. It was hillbilly jazz. It was improvisational, and the vocals killed me. I loved the singing, 2-part, 3-part, 4-part singing. I loved it. I barely could find bluegrass records I was growing up in North San Diego County. Really could never find any. And I finally got hold of a mandolin. I got hold of a guitar, which is all in the book. It's well, as you know, and then I stuck, and I still love the music. I still love the music. I sort of tend to listen to the older stuff, but it's great stuff, and it's just part of our culture, as jazz and blues are, and everything else that we gave to the world.
It's funny,
and even the Beatles. I'm so long-winded answer, but even the Beatles heard it. They heard the excitement in that groove, in that kind of 2/4 groove, as evidenced by "I've Just Seen a Face" or the Buck Owens song, "They're Going to Put Me in the Movies," etc. So that's the end of my. And then,
of course, right, Chris, the Beatles' harmonies. You think about that, and you know that some have come from some of these American influences.
Exactly right.
We could talk all about the Hollies and Graham Nash and Alan's love of the Everly Brothers. But let me tell you actually a real quick anecdote here, because my wife and I went to pick up a car in Boone, North Carolina, and I was a huge Doc Watson fan. Still am a huge Doc Watson fan growing up. And I know you've played you played you're playing at the Birchmere in April of 2022. I know the last time you played there was a few years back. My wife and I saw Doc Watson at the Birchmere a few years before he passed. But when we drove down to North Carolina, we drove through Doc Watson's hometown, and we had no idea that's where we were going. It was a near religious experience for us.
Yeah.
The book is fantastic. Again, the title is Time Between My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. Tell us, it is a fascinating catalog of your life, which is your story is a fascinating one and an amazing one, and the trauma of your childhood, and an idyllic early childhood, and then trauma later on, and then the sort of you're going from bluegrass to folk rock, bluegrass to folk rock, and then back to sort of what what do they call it, country rock. But talk about writing the book.
Funny enough, Andrew, I just sort of, I don't know, 7 years ago, I started to write it, and I don't know, I just, I liked the process. I liked sitting down every day and writing, and I could remember things. And I don't really make a habit of reading people's autobiographies. I did read Linda Ronstadt's,
okay,
and I was very impressed with Linda's way that how she handled it. It was all about.
Sure.
And I remembered that, and she never denigrated anybody she worked with or anything, and put that in print. And actually, in the process, in the midst of writing this book, which it didn't take me 7 years, but it did sit on the shelf for a while. And I finally said to my wife, I said, maybe we should go find a publisher and see if we want to do. Because I originally was going to just write this for my kids, and now we have grandkids. So here's what Papa did. I'm not Grandpa, I'm Papa. So here's what Papa did. So, but then it started to develop, and we were approached by BMG. And they were very interested. They wanted to read some of it. They had this fellow, Scott B. Bomar, who runs the publishing end of it. He said, can I read some of your book? I heard you're writing a memoir. I said, hey, sure. So I sent him a couple chapters. And he calls me back in 2 days, Andrew. He said, let's talk. So all of a sudden, we had a publishing deal on the series. So I really went back in and started to rewrite it, re-edit it. I had some wonderful people helping me, my wife, my daughter, helping me edit this book, and it just came together. And I remembered Linda's book, and I worked with some people that I really wanted to strangle sometimes, but I didn't feel that writing about that was relevant. I thought let's write about really what they were, who they were, what they were about, the talent they had. And everybody I worked with had an immense amount of talent.
Let me ask you this, because believe me, I'm not going to ask you to bash anyone. David Crosby immediately comes to mind, who I'm a massive fan of. But one of the things you talk about,
I'll give a dispensation on that. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, but interestingly enough, when you do talk about the personalities, you humanize them. David Crosby, and sort of his issues, the demons that he struggles with. But you talk about also your bandmate Gene Clark, you talk about Michael Clark, and one of the things that comes up, at least in my mind, is this idea of normal people who are very talented, right? But they are exceedingly normal people who come from normal lives. They rocket to stardom, and that stardom is difficult to handle. You talk about Gene Clark sort of not being able to handle the travel schedule. And as I said, you're very charitable, you're very human about this. But talk about other Graham Parsons, the folks who just seem to be unable to sort of deal with this, and it manifests, any sort of personality quirks get magnified. Talk about that.
Funny enough, I spent a few hours on Dwight Yoakam's XM Sirius radio show yesterday. I go on quite a bit, and it's very nice of him. I love to talk to Dwight. Intelligent.
Right.
And we were talking about success and how it can just take the kid with the dream, right?
Sure.
And all of a sudden it's working, and you've got a hit record and this and that, and then there's some roadblocks thrown up. Now I could put it into a satanic mode that the bad guy is saying, hey, this is that. It is it's an interesting business, being an actor or a singer, songwriter, or an author or whatever. But there's the element of it's just not conducive. You have to really measure out your time. Let me put it this way. When I crossed the threshold of my home in years past, after a tour, I had to remember that where I was going from being paid a lot of attention to and fawned over on the road, when I got home, there were my kids and my wife, and I left that stuff outside the door because they were the priority. And it got to a point when I was in the Desert Rose Band where I was missing my daughter's birthday. I was on the road so much, and we had a very successful band, a lot of hit. Finds that it's time for us to have a little hiatus, if not, just let it go. Yeah. And I thought that I was missing out on the family and all that. That was far more important, and still is a priority in my life. But gosh, did I go off on a tangent there? I'm sorry.
Did, but
where were we?
But it's fine. I mean, we're talking about the trappings of stardom and how they magnify it for people, and I think you.
But I'm going to make a point clear about Gene Clark. What a prolific songwriter, and yes, he had so many issues. And when I first met Gene, he was a Kansas farm boy. He was just a wonderful guy, and he was throughout his life. But he was constantly having to battle with the demons that he was dealing with. And I must say, I worked on every one of his records after the Byrds, which was really a pleasure. I loved his songs and how he was a great, looked good, but it just never could ever get over that bad part. He couldn't get over that big bump in the road. Now, interestingly enough, Graham Parsons also had the talent, but the problem with Graham was he had a trust fund, and I'm telling you why this was every year, every January, Andrew, he would get $55,000.
Wow.
Okay, well, that's in 1968 when I started working with him. That was a fortune.
Yeah.
And everybody that has the aspirations to be, I want to be an actor. You're going to starve. You're going to struggle to achieve the goal, and it's not going to be a challenge or a struggle if you've got a heck of a safety net like that. I think that held.
I had a conversation the other day in the wake of Charlie Rose's passing. Frank Agnello from a band called the Fab Four. He's a guitarist, one of the founders of this band, the Fab Four. Not sure if you're familiar with them. They break down Beatles music and they reproduce the album sound live on stage. Frank heard that I was talking with you. He was very excited about this. He had a question, and he wanted me to ask you. And he said, I'd be interested, this is him talking, if he has any insight to the question, did Graham Parsons have any uncredited writing input for Wild Horses? He says he has a friend who used to say, "Oh, come on, Graham wrote that song." Do you have any insight into this?
Yes. No, he had no part in the writing of that song. Okay. Jagger, Mick and Keith wrote that, and somehow Graham had heard it, and literally begging them if we could cut it, and I just wasn't that taken. I wasn't taken by the song, and that was just me again. I said, I don't know. This is sort of very maudlin. It's nice. I like the lyric. Wild Horses couldn't drag me away. Sure. But he was. This goes back in the book. As you remember, I write about Mick and Keith taking Roger McGuinn and I to Stonehenge, and that's in the band. That's when we had hired him, but Graham became very enamored with the Stones at that point, and just was, and that's the end of the story. So it's all in the book.
And the book, of course, is called Time Between: My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. You can get signed hardcover copies. In fact, I'm probably going to do that myself, Chris. At chrishillman.com. We'll put the link up on the Andrew Langer Show page on Facebook. I got more questions here, if it's okay. I mean, we're talking about these things. We're talking about the book. How did you make? I mean, I know it's in the book. You talk about making the. You were introduced to the other members of the Byrds. You heard Roger, then Jim McGuinn singing. You heard Crosby singing. How was that transition for you? I
didn't know them, but I did hear Troubadour folk club was sort of the place to go on Monday nights. They'd have an open mic hoot night.
Sure, hoot night.
And right down the street, within a matter of 4 blocks, was the Ash Grove, and they would bring in Lightnin' Hopkins and Bill Monroe and all the cool stuff.
Oh, wow.
But this is 1964, and the Troubadour, and I actually was in one Monday night, and I either had played the hoot night or something. But this guy gets up on stage with a Gibson 12-string acoustic guitar and sings, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and I went,
yes.
"Wow!" I said, "That's the Beatles song." It was Jim McGuinn, and he did it with. That's really good, and what guts to go do that,
Sure.
right? And then, as time passed by, I had already been working with the gentleman Jim Dixon, who was working with Gene Clark and David Crosby and Roger McGuinn, and trying to develop their sound. And he asked me to come down and listen to them at the studio they were using. And I went down after my gig I had at. I worked. I got off this gig I was working on in bluegrass group. And I heard them sing, and I said, "Wow, they sound great." Well, listen, Andrew, my standard way up. I'd been working with Vern Gosden and his brother Rex, and those guys could sing like angels. So I go in to hear these 3 guys sing, and I went, "They got it. Wow. They really got it." And I told Jim Dixon, I said, this is great. They sound great. Good luck. So I
Crosby,
go back to my.
No, I was just going to say, you keep going, because I'll ask my question about rehearsing in the studio space. But please go ahead.
Oh no! I just went back to my gig. I had this gig. The Greengrass Group was just absolutely dreadful, but it was I could eat. Okay,
sure.
It was a terrible band. It was almost like the Beverly Hillbillies.
Sure.
Beverly Hillbillies
Sure.
Put to music. And
was
I go back to the gig, and then I get
for a second, Chris. Was this the band where the guy who put you all together was writing these awful songs?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That sounded just like the most horrific situation to be in.
Awful. So
yeah.
I go back, and then about a week or 2 later, Jim Dixon calls me. He said, "Can you play the bass?" And I'm going. It took me about 2 seconds. I went, "Okay, where are we going here?" He's gonna. And he says David Crosby was going to be the bass player, but he doesn't feel comfortable. Can you play bass? And I went, I can lying through my teeth.
But isn't that the way these things happen,
bass.
Right? I mean, Chris, isn't that the way these things happen? Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, it was just I see this door opening, as it did in my life throughout my whole life. I'd always see this wonderful door opportunity open up, but I said, "Yeah, I can handle it." I didn't say I think I can handle it. I said I can handle that. And he says, "Well, can you come down? Blah blah blah. Can you find a bass or something?" I can't remember if I found this $50 bass. I remember that the sum $50 was not good, or if they got one down there for me to borrow. But I go down to this studio, World Pacific Studios at morning, and there's one amplifier, and Roger's plugged into it, and he's got an acoustic 12 with a pickup on it. And so I go, okay. I didn't know them. I said, "Hi, I'm Chris." I plug in. Gene's playing. Mike Clark barely has a drum kit. You can see this in the book, but I assumed I was walking in that they were already just unbelievably together and tight and all that. And I walk in, and I thought for a minute it was a skiffle band, a jug band, Lonnie Donegan, with the gear. They had no gear. So anyway, it worked out. I got the job, but this is the funny part. So when I was on the road about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, with Roger McGuinn and Marty Stewart, and one night after the show, I said, "Hey, Roger," I said, "how many guys did you call for the bass job in the Byrds?" He said, You were the one. I said, "Really?" He goes, "Why are you asking me now, 55 years later?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "I don't know. I just thought of that." I said, "They must have called." And he said, no, you fit. It worked, and you turned into a really good bass player, which was very nice of him to say. Because when I started, Andrew, I was struggling.
Sure.
I didn't know what I was doing. I was a mandolin player.
That's why you had the benefits of recording in that studio space every night, because you could play stuff and then hear it back. Crosby was just on Sirius XM talking about that. I mean, that's a tremendous opportunity. The book, of course, is Time Between: My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. My guest is Chris Hillman. You can get hardcover copies of this at chrishillman.com. He's going to be at the Birchmere next April of 2022. I can't wait till you're there. Let me ask you this: as the Byrds are changing, as personnel's leaving, David Crosby leaves, Gene Clark leaves, you have to step out from just being a musician. You talk about this in the book. You were someone who was very comfortable being in the background. You loved the music. You loved playing the music. But I don't think, at least the way I understood it, you didn't really seek the spotlight. How was that transition from sort of stepping out and stepping into being a lead vocalist and being more in that spotlight?
Well, mostly I was so shy. I really didn't have the confidence. I had a lack of confidence. I did sing. I remember at Ciro's, I was thinking the other day when we played Ciro's, we were in there for so long doing 3 sets a night, which was a nightclub on the Sunset Strip.
And I'm sorry, Chris, to interrupt. Hold on, let me interrupt for a second, Chris. And to let folks know, when Chris Hillman played at Ciro's, that's when his mother knew that he had finally made it, because that was a big thing for him. You talk about that in the book as well.
My folks would go to Ciro's in the 30s and 40s. I mean, nightclubs were huge all over. Chicago, New York, Atlanta, whatever. But I did sing at Ciro's occasionally. But when Gene left, I did go up to the front line and start singing more parts and stuff with them. But I had wonderful teachers. Yeah. I could sing, Andrew, but I didn't have the commitment yet. I wasn't a very good. I wasn't a good actor. And that's what David and Roger and Gene, wonderful, wonderful people to listen to and learn how to phrase. Singing's all about phrasing the lyric. And I got my confidence, and I learned how to sing over the years. And then I began writing songs in the Byrds around 1966. And we were going really well. I must tell you, it was one of the greatest experiences and opportunities I ever had in my life. But I went on with other things and had equally wonderful times. I was always first and foremost a musician. I didn't want to be Bruce Springsteen. I wasn't good enough, or anybody, Jackson Browne or anybody.
Sure.
But I was a musician, and it's funny, the last interview Tom Petty did was for the Los Angeles Times, and Tom had just worked on producing my album, and he says, Chris is a funny guy. I love him. He's got a great sense of humor, but I don't think he ever liked show business. He's a musician, and I read that, and I went, he's got it, because I didn't. Andrew, I didn't care if I was in a limousine. I just wanted it all to work. I wanted everybody to be engaging with each other on stage and performing, and I don't know how I even realized that. At a young age, but that we were up there to make people feel good, and somebody shells out the money to hear.
Yes.
To be entertained, we have to do that. Whether we have to play turn 1,000 times, you gotta.
I went and saw, my wife and I went to see on the last Simon and Garfunkel reunion tour. We spent the money. We spent the money to sit up front, and it was one of the most uncomfortable situations. Again, like watching some of these performances of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right, where they weren't looking at each other. Simon and Garfunkel, not looking at each other. And it was not fun to be there. I mean, it was one of those things where you want to see them working together. You want to see the concert at Central Park energy. It wasn't there. Let me ask you this, because I love your work with the Flying Burrito Brothers as the Flying Burrito Brothers, and familiar with Chris's work there. If you're a fan of the band, for instance, you'll love the Flying Burrito Brothers. How do you distinguish? And I've asked a couple of folks this week. How do you distinguish country rock from Southern rock?
I don't know. Well, it's so funny. I really have to attribute that. You have to attribute that term First, it was like, I think, lazy journalism. You know what I mean? It's like somebody wrote a piece on the Byrds in '65 after we had success with Mr. Tambourine Man, Bob Dylan's song, and so folk rock. So we were folk rock. We were labeled folk rock and much attention. But then as we grew as a band, and all of a sudden we did 8 Miles High, and then we were jazz rock, and then psychedelic rock, and it was going on, and I said, I'm waiting for polka rock. I'm waiting for it. Come on. And anyway,
that was you had to wait for Weird Al for that, Chris.
So, and rock comes along, or country music, and but the thing that's interesting, it wasn't a stretch for us to do that. We already had cut. Well, the first time we cut a country song was the second Byrds album in 1965. The album Turn, Turn, Turn was the title. And on that album is Satisfied Mind, a song that Porter Wagner had a huge hit with. And we cut it, and it worked. It was a great lyric. It worked for the Byrds. And over the years, Andrew, we did some more country stuff. And then I did, my first song I ever wrote was Time Between, the title of the book, which really was a song.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I think there's just a little more emphasis on backbeat. I don't think there's really that much difference. It's the same recipe. It's a simplistic chord pattern, a little more backbeat, but basically it's I don't know. It's like
strikes
saying
you both. They're all the same. To me, they both strike at a very elemental level with people, and I mean that in the best way.
It's like country music from Nashville and from Bakersfield are a little different.
Sure.
And it's because of the environment and it was just a little different. It's still country music though.
Sure.
But anyway, so there we are, and then I know. I mean, there's a lot of. You see things where you know that they're not getting along. My daughter went and saw a concert of a very, very famous act, and she said, gosh, they like each other.
Yeah.
Now, she didn't know the history of this band, but she figured it out, and that's what was going on with them at the time. The best thing I can tell you also, when we were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1991, initially, it was David and Roger and I were there with our wives, and somehow Gene and Mike's wives couldn't make it, and they didn't initially sit with us. And then Camilla McGuinn, Roger's wife, brought them over to the table.
Sure.
I will go on record. We were probably the only band that sat together and enjoyed that moment.
Interesting.
And we sat together, and we enjoyed that, and we were being honored for that moment in time. And we played together that night. But there's a lot of groups that go in there and get awarded, and they don't even talk to each other.
Absolutely.
So that's too bad. But we did. That was a great fitting. I'm tired of this word, but it was a wonderful closure to a great time. Yeah.
Well, before. I was going to ask you about the sort of that whole Laurel Canyon scene converting from the 60s into the 70s, but I think my listeners would be more interested in, you talked about Linda Ronstadt a couple of minutes ago. You talked about her autobiography, and you talked about some of her work, and obviously was a part of that scene going into this, her working with the Beatles, not the Beatles, the Eagles, and getting them together. But most importantly, and I think you share this with Linda Ronstadt, is you both make music on your terms, and talk about how important that is for musicians to sort of make the music that you want to make.
Well, here's another tired cliche. You got to follow your heart.
Yeah. And
the worst thing as a songwriter, you don't sit there and go, okay, I got to write a song that's number one on the Billboard charts.
Yeah.
By the time you write that kind of a song and it gets released and all, it's already watered downstream. You've got to follow your heart and stay true to what you're doing. We all start out emulating others. It's getting to the point of innovating. Right,
sure.
You follow me. You get that.
Oh yeah,
so then
absolutely.
You go from you're going. And I learned off Bill Monroe records, and then I figured out I'm never going to be Bill Monroe. So I played the mandolin Chris Hillman style, whatever that means.
Sure.
Pretty but that's a very important element. And of course, the record companies, if you have an initial huge success on your first release, they want more of the same.
Right.
And you should sort of stay within the parameters of what you do well in your comfort zone, but you should never. I don't really believe in following someone saying you need to do this kind of music to do. I've heard that all my life, and I didn't listen to it. When Desert Rose Band got signed, all of a sudden to MCA Curb, we get signed, and all of a sudden I'm getting all these songs sent to me. Well, Nashville's a publishing town. It's a songwriting town. And I'm looking at these songs, I'm going, I'm not going to record these. These are not what we are.
Sure.
And we stuck to our guns, and we had a successful. We had about 6 or 7 top 10 singles and about 2 or 3 number ones.
And
so we stuck to what we believed in.
The Desert Rose Band. Yeah. Such good music.
Thank you. I wish I could talk to you. Yeah, you get 2 more, but I'm sorry. I'm going to be late, but I don't mind. I love talking to you, Andrew, but unfortunately, I'm limited here. Go
Real
ahead.
quick, then, because then that's fine. Because what's next? You're going to be at Alexandria, Virginia, at the Birchmere in April. What is next for you, or are you just playing music? What's going on?
September 24th and 25th, I will be playing in Thousand Oaks, California, which is sort of down the road from me.
Sure.
At the Civic Arts Theater, beautiful theater, and Roger McGuinn played there. I sat in and sang with him, which was a joy. And now Roger and I go on stage, just to add what you saw with Simon and Garfunkel. We would be playing with Marty Stewart. We'd sing a song together, and then we'd hug each other.
Nice.
Nice. So, anyway, that's where I'll be, Andrew. I'll be the 24th, 25th at Thousand Oaks at the Thousand Oaks Civic Center for two nights. And after that, I'm not quite sure, but you'll probably see it on my website.
On your website.
And yes, April 5th, Birchmere, 2022.
April 5th, Birchmere. Okay.
Yes, sir.
April 5th, 2022.
Love that club.
Yeah, and it's such a great venue.
Love the club. Love Gary. I love that. I've worked in there in 4 different entities.
Wow.
4 different bands.
Well, the book is called Time Between My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. You can get signed hardcover copies at chrishillman.com. Chris Hillman, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Andrew, what a pleasure, man. Thank you for calling me and having me on your show. That was very kind, and I love talking to you.
Thank you for being patient with us.
I wish it was we had more time, but
we'll get you back.
We'll
get you
buddy.
back. Take care.
God bless. Thank you.
And that was Chris Hillman, founding member of the Byrds, founding member of the Flying Burrito Brothers, the Desert Rose Band. I'm Andrew Langer. This is WBAL News Radio 1090 and FM 101.